The morning I found a brick wall blocking my driveway, I honestly thought I was looking at somebody else's problem. That's the first thing I remember. Not anger, not panic, confusion. The kind that makes you stand there longer than you should, coffee cooling off in your hand while your brain tries to catch up to what your eyes are seeing. I had walked out of my front door just after sunrise, same as I had done almost every day for the last 15 years. The air smelled like damp grass and red clay. Somewhere out behind the barn, my old hound Duke was barking at absolutely nothing, which was one of his favorite hobbies. Everything felt normal. Then I looked down my driveway, and there it was, an 8-foot brick wall, right across the entrance. Clean, fresh, perfectly straight, like somebody had dropped it from the sky overnight. For a second, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. I stood there staring at it and thought, no way, this is real. Then I saw the sign bolted into the center. White background, black lettering, official looking, very official looking. It read, Perimeter Improvement Project authorized by Maple Ridge Community Association. My smile disappeared immediately because I didn't live in Maple Ridge. Never had, never planned to. My property sat right next to their subdivision, but that was where our relationship ended. They had gated entrances, decorative streetlights, matching mailboxes and homeowners meetings where people apparently debated acceptable shades of beige. I had 80 acres, a weathered farmhouse, a crooked red barn, and a pickup truck old enough to remember cassette tapes. We were neighbors, not family, definitely not partners, and they sure as hell weren't in charge of my driveway. I walked closer to the wall. Fresh mortar, still drying. Somebody had built the thing recently, very recently. I ran my hand across the brick and felt something strange settle in my stomach. Because this wasn't vandalism. This wasn't teenagers. This wasn't some prank. This was organized, planned, approved, paid for, which meant somebody had decided they had the authority to block access to my property and expected me to simply accept it. That realization made my coffee taste bitter. My name's Wyatt Mercer. I live outside a small town called Dry Creek, Tennessee. My Uncle Frank left me the property when he passed away 7 years earlier. Most people saw 80 acres of dirt, trees, and old buildings. I saw memories. I learned to drive on that land, learned to fish on that land, learned how to rebuild an engine and split firewood and survive hard winters on that land. When Uncle Frank died, I scattered his ashes beneath an oak tree overlooking the pond. So when people asked why I never sold, my answer was always simple. You can't put a price tag on the places that built you. Maple Ridge never understood that. They started trying to buy the property almost as soon as construction began. At first, they were friendly, real friendly. Development representatives showed up with brochures and big smiles. They talked about opportunity, growth, community vision. One guy actually used the phrase unlocking land potential. I remember looking at him and thinking, buddy, this land was doing just fine before you arrived. When I refused to sell, things slowly changed. The smiles got tighter. The letters started arriving. Suggestions, concerns, recommendations. My barn apparently affected neighborhood aesthetics. My gravel road created dust concerns. My truck was considered visually disruptive. That one still makes me laugh. A visually disruptive truck. Imagine telling a man in rural Tennessee that his truck is too truck-shaped. But underneath all those polite words was something else. Pressure. Because my property sat between Maple Ridge and County Route 14. Without my land, they had only one narrow access road. With it, they could create a direct connection that would increase convenience and boost home values. I knew it. They knew it. Everybody knew it. Still, I said no. Every single time. Eventually, the visits stopped. The letters slowed down. And for a while, things got quiet. Maybe that's why the wall caught me so off guard. I thought we'd reached an understanding. Turns out they'd simply moved on to a different strategy. I pulled out my phone and called the number listed on the sign. The woman who answered sounded calm, almost rehearsed. When I explained who I was, there was a brief pause. Then she said something that would change everything. Mr. Mercer, the association approved the barrier after determining the roadway falls within our planned expansion zone. Expansion zone? I stared at the wall. Then I stared at the old stretch of pavement running beneath it. And suddenly a memory surfaced. 5 years earlier. A county auction, an abandoned road parcel, a stack of paperwork, a deed, my deed, because the road they thought they controlled wasn't theirs. It belonged to me. And if I remember correctly, they hadn't just built a wall near my property. They had built it directly on top of it. I hung up without another word, walked back into my house, opened the fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet, and started looking for documents. What I found would turn a bad morning into a disaster for Maple Ridge. And before the week was over, that wall would become the most expensive mistake their board had ever made. What I found inside that lockbox was exactly what I hoped it would be. The deed, original county records, tax receipts, survey maps, everything. I spread the paperwork across my kitchen table and sat there for nearly an hour, checking dates, parcel numbers, signatures, making sure I wasn't missing something obvious. Because here's the thing about anger. It's useful right up until the moment it makes you careless. And careless people lose fights they should win. By noon I was convinced. The road parcel belonged to me. Legally. Clearly. Without question. Which meant somebody at Maple Ridge had either made a spectacular mistake or had convinced themselves ownership was more of a suggestion than a fact. Neither possibility made me feel better. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Ryan Holloway showed up about 45 minutes later. Ryan was one of those guys who never seemed in a hurry. Tall, sunburned, permanent coffee cup in one hand. The kind of deputy who could calm down a bar fight simply by looking disappointed. When he saw the wall, he stopped walking and stared for several seconds. Then he let out a long whistle. Well, he said, that's definitely new. I handed him the documents. He read them carefully, twice. Then he looked back at the wall, then back at me. You want me to start making calls? I looked past him toward the bricks. Part of me wanted exactly that. A few phone calls, a county order, heavy equipment, problem solved. Simple. But another part of me remembered every letter, every complaint, every time somebody from Maple Ridge had treated me like an obstacle instead of a neighbor. And for the first time, I realized something. Removing the wall wouldn't fix the real problem. The real problem was that they thought they could do this in the first place. No, I said, I've got another idea. Ryan stared at me, the way a man stares at somebody who just announced he's going to wrestle a bear. Legal? He asked. Absolutely. Smart. I guess we'll find out. He laughed. Good luck. The next morning, I called a surveyor named Elena Brooks. Elena had been doing boundary work around Dry Creek for almost 20 years. She trusted measurements more than opinions, which automatically made her one of my favorite people. By mid-morning, she was walking the property with GPS equipment and bright orange markers. I followed along quietly. After about an hour, she stopped, checked her tablet one final time, and smiled. Not a big smile. The kind of smile somebody gives when they know another person is about to have a very bad day. They crossed the line. How far? About 3 feet. I nodded. 3 feet. That was all. 3 feet that could cost somebody a fortune. 3 feet that transformed an embarrassing mistake into a legal nightmare. 3 feet that gave me options. I paid Elena, got everything documented, and spent the rest of the afternoon making copies. Then I called my friend Hank Porter. Now Hank owned a fabrication shop outside town. If steel could be welded, bent, repaired, reinforced, customized, or made unnecessarily dramatic, Hank was your guy. We'd known each other since high school. When I told him about the wall, he laughed so hard I had to pull the phone away from my ear. They built a wall. They built a wall. On your road. On my road. There was a pause. Then he said the most Hank Porter thing imaginable. So what were we building? By sunset, we were standing beside the wall, discussing possibilities. At first it started as a joke. Then it slowly stopped being one. The road parcel I owned connected directly to Maple Ridge's preferred exit route. Not their only route, just the fastest one. The route they advertised. The route homeowners used every day. The route that made the subdivision attractive to buyers. The route running across property I owned. And standing there beside that wall, looking at traffic moving through the distance, an idea began taking shape. A ridiculous idea. A beautiful idea. A completely legal idea. 3 days later, Hank's crew arrived with steel posts. Massive ones. We installed them just beyond the disputed area on land that unquestionably belonged to me. Then came the gate. 14 feet wide. Heavy-duty steel. Industrial hinges. Strong enough to stop a truck. And because Hank possessed the emotional maturity of a 12-year-old when presented with an opportunity for mischief, we painted it bright neon green. Not tasteful green. Not forest green. Construction zone green. The kind of color that practically glowed. Across the center, we mounted a metal sign. Private road, authorized access, only and no trespassing. I should have been satisfied. Most people would have been. But then I remembered something. About 20 miles outside Dry Creek, an old dirt racetrack had recently closed. And that racetrack happened to have an abandoned ticket booth. The owner sold it to me for almost nothing. 2 days later, it sat directly beside the road. Fresh paint, sliding window, small desk, coffee maker, everything a respectable businessman might need. When Hank saw it, he laughed until tears rolled down his face. "You actually did it." "Oh, I'm doing it." Then came the final touch. A sign. Simple, professional, impossible to misunderstand. Private toll road, monthly access available residents. $250 per month guests. $10 per entry HOA board members. $700 per month, no exceptions, no negotiation, no refunds. I may have enjoyed that last part more than I should admit. Saturday morning, I arrived before sunrise. Coffee thermos. Folding chair. Newspaper. I unlocked the gate and waited. At around 8:15, the first SUV appeared. A woman rolled down her window, looked at the gate, looked at the booth, looked at me, then looked at the sign. "What exactly is this?" "Morning," I said. "Private toll road." She blinked several times. "I'm sorry, what?" "Road access plan. Information's on the sign." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "But we already pay HOA dues." I nodded sympathetically. "Sounds expensive." The second vehicle arrived, then a third, then a fourth. Within 20 minutes, a line had formed. People got out of their cars. Phones appeared. Pictures were taken. Questions were asked. Most of them weren't directed at me. Most of them were directed toward Maple Ridge. And that's when I saw him. Bradley Whitaker, president of the Homeowners Association. The man who had personally visited my property more times than anyone else. The man who once described my barn as an unfortunate visual inconsistency. A phrase I had never forgotten. Bradley marched toward the booth with the confidence of someone expecting obedience. Halfway there, he noticed the gate, the toll sign, the growing traffic line, the cameras, and I actually watched realization hit him. His face changed, just slightly, but enough. He stopped, took a breath, then kept walking. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I sipped coffee. "Good morning." "What is this?" "Toll road." "You can't do that." "Sure I can." "No, you can't." Actually, I checked. His jaw tightened. The crowd had grown larger now. People were listening, watching, recording, and Bradley knew it. That was the moment this stopped being a private disagreement. Now it had an audience. "You're creating a problem for this entire community." I looked toward the wall, then back at him. Funny. That's exactly what I was thinking on Tuesday morning. For a second, neither of us spoke. The silence landed harder than shouting ever could. Then Bradley leaned closer. His voice lowered. "You need to remove this gate." I smiled. "You need to remove that wall." His expression darkened immediately. And right then, standing between a traffic jam, a neon green gate, and a crowd of increasingly irritated homeowners, Bradley Whitaker finally realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. The quiet guy at the edge of the subdivision wasn't backing down. In fact, I was only getting started. By Monday morning, the entire situation had exploded far beyond anything Bradley Whitaker had anticipated. What started as a wall had turned into a public relations disaster. Videos from the weekend were everywhere. Local Facebook groups, community forums, neighborhood pages. Even people outside Dry Creek were sharing clips of the neon green gate and the toll booth. The comments were split right down the middle. Some people thought I was a hero. Others thought I was a stubborn old troublemaker. Personally, I was fine with either description. What mattered was that people were asking questions. Questions Bradley didn't want to answer. Questions about property lines. Questions about HOA spending. Questions about who approved an $80,000 construction project without verifying ownership first. Questions have a funny way of making powerful people uncomfortable, especially when the answers aren't good. Around 10 o'clock, I saw 3 vehicles approaching together. One black SUV, one silver sedan, one pickup. The convoy rolled to a stop near the gate. Bradley stepped out first. He looked exhausted, not angry, not arrogant, just tired. Behind him were 2 board members and a lawyer carrying a leather briefcase. That told me everything I needed to know. The fight had entered a different phase. I stepped out of the booth. The lawyer offered a professional smile. "Mr. Mercer, morning. We'd like to discuss a resolution." I glanced toward Bradley. "That's a new attitude." The lawyer ignored that. "Smart man. We've reviewed the survey documents." "Good. There appears to have been a boundary error." I couldn't help smiling. A 3-foot boundary error and about 80 feet of brick. Neither board member looked comfortable. One woman actually stared at the ground the entire time. The lawyer cleared his throat. "The association is prepared to remove the structure." I folded my arms. "That's a start. And compensate you for documented damages." Bradley's jaw tightened when he heard those words. Compensate. People like Bradley never mind spending other people's money. It's spending it to admit fault that hurts. I looked past them toward Maple Ridge. Rows of beautiful homes. Families. Kids riding bicycles. People who probably had no idea how this mess started. Truthfully, I never had a problem with those residents. Most of them were decent folks. Their board was the problem. And now even that board seemed to understand it. "I'll need reimbursement for the survey." The lawyer nodded. "Agreed." The gate. "Agreed." The booth. A brief pause. Then another nod. "Agreed." The landscaping damage. "Agreed." I let a few seconds pass. Then I added one more thing. A written acknowledgement that the construction occurred on property owned by me. That landed like a brick. No pun intended. Bradley immediately looked toward the lawyer. The lawyer looked toward the board members. Nobody spoke, because money was one thing. An admission was another. Finally, the lawyer exhaled. Yes. That single word changed everything. The negotiation was over. The outcome was decided. The only thing left was paperwork. As they turned to leave, Bradley stopped. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he spoke quietly, almost calmly. "You know, Wyatt, if you'd sold the property years ago, none of this would have happened." I looked at him for several seconds. Not because I was angry, because I was honestly surprised he still didn't understand. "If you'd respected the property line," I said, "none of this would have happened either." The words hung there. Simple, direct, impossible to argue with. For the first time since I'd known him, Bradley didn't have a response. He simply turned around and walked away. 2 days later, demolition crews arrived. The same efficiency that had built the wall now tore it apart. Brick by brick, truck by truck. I stood near the driveway and watched the entire process. Not because I enjoyed it, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a little satisfaction involved. Mostly I watched because I wanted to see the mistake disappear. The wall had never belonged there. Now everyone finally understood that. A week later, certified mail arrived. Inside was a formal apology, a reimbursement check, documentation acknowledging the boundary violation, and a signed agreement covering future road access and maintenance responsibilities. Everything was official, transparent, recorded, exactly the way it should have been from the beginning. Then came the final surprise. About 2 weeks after the wall came down, Bradley Whitaker resigned as HOA president. I didn't celebrate. Honestly, I didn't feel much of anything, because by that point, the fight wasn't really about Bradley anymore. It was about something bigger. The reason this whole story stuck with me isn't the wall, or the gate, or the toll booth. It's what I learned about boundaries. Most people think boundaries are fences and survey stakes and legal descriptions. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're invisible. Sometimes they're the line between confidence and arrogance, between leadership and control, between asking and assuming. For years, I believed keeping quiet was the same thing as keeping peace. I thought ignoring nonsense made me above it. Turns out silence has a downside. When you never speak up, people start assuming you'll never push back. And eventually somebody mistakes your patience for permission. That's exactly what happened here. The funny thing is, the gate is still standing today. The booth too. I keep both as a reminder. Most days the gate stays open. Residents pass through without stopping. Some even wave. A few have become friends. One older couple brings me pie every Thanksgiving. Life is strange that way. Sometimes your biggest conflict ends with somebody sharing dessert. Every now and then I'll walk down to the road around sunset. The place where that wall once stood looks completely ordinary now. Just asphalt, grass, open space. Nothing dramatic. If you didn't know the story, you'd never guess what happened there. But I remember, and every time I stand there, I find myself asking the same question. Maybe it's a question worth asking you too. Did I go too far? Should I have called the county and had the wall removed immediately? Should I have skipped the gate, skipped the toll booth, skipped the public embarrassment? Or was that exactly the lesson that needed to be taught? Because here's the truth. The wall cost Maple Ridge money. The gate cost them pride. And sometimes pride hurts a whole lot more. So I'd really like to hear your take. If somebody built a wall across your property, what would you have done? Would you have handled it quietly? Would you have fought harder? Or would you have built something even bigger than a neon green toll gate? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a difficult neighbor, a property dispute, or somebody who thought they could decide where your boundaries should be, share that story too. If you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stick around. Because some of the most unbelievable stories aren't found in movies. They're hiding at the end of gravel roads, waiting for somebody to tell them.